For those who are interested in the real world, a look at the actual history suggests an adjustment, a modification of free market theory to what we might call really existing free market theory. That is the one that's actually applied, not talked about. And the principle of really existing free market theory is free markets are fine for you, but not for me. That's, again, near a universal. So you, whoever you may be, you have to learn responsibility and be subjected to market discipline. It's good for your character. It's tough love, and so on and so forth. But me, I need the nanny state to protect me from market discipline so that I'll be able to rant and rave about the marvels of the free market while I'm getting properly subsidized and defended by everyone else through the nanny state. And also, this has to be risk-free. So I'm perfectly willing to make profits, but I don't want to take risks. If anything goes wrong, you bail me out. Okay. So if third world debt gets out of control, you socialize it. It's not the problem of the banks that made the money. When the S&Ls collapse, same thing. Public bails them out. When American investment firms get into trouble because the Mexican bubble bursts, you bail out Goldman Sachs. And the Mexico bailout, and on and on. I mean, there's case after case of this. In fact, of the top 100 leading transnationals in the Fortune list of transnationals, there was a recent study of how they related to the states in which they're all somewhere, so they're all mostly here in some national state. It turns out that all 100 of them had benefited from industrial policies, meaning state intervention in their behalf. All 100 had benefited from the state in which they're based, and 20 of the 100 had been saved from total disaster, that is collapse, by just state bailout. When people talk about globalization of the economy, remember that the nanny state has to be very powerful in order to bail out the rich, and nothing is changing in that regard. 20 out of 100, again, were saved from collapse by this, including a number here. Well, that's really existing free market theory. There are many examples of it quite close to home, so we could start with our own governor, Governor Weld, who's described by the Boston Globe as a libertarian with a religious belief in free markets. And then a couple of days later, they reported that through various scams, his administration was able to sharply increase federal subsidies to Massachusetts so that way beyond what they were before, so that he could parade as a fiscal conservative. And that's pretty common. Just a year before, you may recall if you have long memories, they had to close George's Bank, the richest fishing area in the world, because it was being overfished thanks to a combination of deregulation and subsidies to the fishing industry, which have that odd consequence that you tend to get overfishing. So it looked as if the ground fish were wiped out and they had to close it off. It didn't take long for the religious libertarian fanatic William Weld to take the next jet plane down to Washington, hat in hand, asking for a federal bailout. He wanted the national federal government to declare it a natural disaster. And the reason was, as he explained, with presumably some scientists in tow, that there was some strange kind of predatory fish, which no one had yet found, but they would find it, don't worry. So some kind of predatory fish had come and sort of wiped out all the, the cod and the haddock and all those things. So it was a natural disaster, and therefore the general public had to sort of pay off the results of deregulation and subsidizing the fishing industry. Well, that's the way to be a libertarian with religious fervor. Another one is the leader of the conservative revolution, Newt Gingrich. Nobody's more passionate about the market than he is, in particular about his own district, which he calls a Norman Rockwell world of jet planes and fiber optics, as indeed it is, except if you ask where jet planes and fiber optics came from, you discover that the public paid for them and still pays for them. And in fact, he manages to get more federal subsidies for his district than any suburban county in the country outside the federal system. So you can have conservatism flowering among the malls and so on. Or you can go back to the Reaganites, who are also very passionate about free markets for everyone else. Meanwhile, they boasted to the American business community correctly, that they had done more, that they had instituted more protection than any post-war American administration, in fact, more than all of them combined. They had doubled import restrictions, blocking and helped and poured public funds into major industries to enable them to recapitalize, to protect, in fact, reconstruct the steel industry and the automotive industry and the semiconductors and so on, which would have disappeared if they'd opened the markets. The Thatcherites in England were about the same. Government expenditures relative to GNP stayed pretty constant, although anything that went to the general population collapsed. Meanwhile, military industry shot up. Arms sales are booming. That's all publicly subsidized stuff. Arms sales to nice guys like Saddam Hussein and General Suharto and others. Well, that's really existing free market theory. What are the core policies? Well, the Washington Consensus, which is basically designed for the third world to make it that way and keep it that way, it's now being applied not just to the third world countries, but to the rich industrial societies, with the United States and Britain in the lead. However, it's with a twist. Since it's being applied at home, this is really existing free market theory that's being applied at home, meaning nuanced. So powerful government to protect the rich, and market discipline and tough love for everyone else. And you see that very clearly. Go through the various elements of the Washington Consensus. The first one is about reducing government. Well, that's false. We're not reducing government. We're shifting it around. So social spending is indeed way down since the 1970s, when this stuff started. Accelerated after 1980, but it was starting in the mid-70s. The kind of a benchmark example is AFDC, the main support system. That was cut virtually in half from about 1970 to 1990, with obvious effects on poor families and children and so on. It was part of a general war against women and children that was conducted by the conservatives under the name of family values. It's interesting that they were able to get away with that. That tells you something about the intellectual culture. Well, one part was the reduction of AFDC by roughly half, from about 1970 to about 1990. It's now essentially gone. Purpose of that, as you know, is so that 7 million, a couple of million, I think 5 or 6 million kids, average 7 years old, can learn responsibility. That's part of tough love. Meanwhile, another part of the government has been very stable and, in fact, is going up, namely the Pentagon system, which remains at approximately Cold War levels. In fact, it's higher now than it was under Nixon, although the big enemy has disappeared, which tells you exactly how much, tells a rational person at least, exactly how much they were worried about the Russian threat. Not only does it remain at Cold War levels, but it's going up under the initiative of the fiscal conservatives. The Heritage Foundation, which, sort of the right-wing foundation that designs the budget for the Gingrich Army, are calling for an increase in the Pentagon system, as is Gingrich, as indeed was Clinton. So that goes up. And I should say that cutting of social spending is being cut very sharply, very much over public opposition. At the time of the 1994 congressional election, the big landslide, over 60% of the public wanted social spending to increase. Okay, went very sharply down. What about Pentagon spending going up? Well, this public is 6-to-1 opposed to that, which gives you one aspect of a big picture about what's happening to American democracy. I mean, somewhat of a change, not a huge change. So one part of the system is going up, Pentagon spending. Another part's going down, social spending. And the same is true in other domains. Like, for example, legal aid for the poor is being slashed and virtually destroyed. On the other hand, the security system, the government security system, state and federal, that's going up. So prisons are going way up. The prison population, crime hasn't changed for about 20 years. And incidentally, U.S. crime rates are not off the spectrum, contrary to what a lot of people believe. Crime rates are sort of toward the high end of the industrial world, but not off the spectrum, with one exception, namely murder with guns. But that's a special feature of American society, which doesn't have to do with crime rates. Apart from that, crime rates are kind of toward the high end, not going up. The prison population tripled during the Reagan years, is going up even faster now. And I think the reason is another aspect of the third world model, namely the superfluous population. There is a big superfluous population. They don't contribute to wealth protection. Well, we're civilized folks. We're not like the people we fund in Colombia who go out and murder them, so we throw them into jail. And that's going way up in even more. And there's also a kind of like a side benefit to this. The putting more and more people in jail